Hello, everybody. On today's episode, I have on a guest who has been researching Tartaria, star forts, mud floods, lighthouses, Freemasons, and much more for many years. She has an amazing website, piercingtheveilofillusion.com, and the YouTube channel Michelle Gibson. Everybody, welcome Michelle Gibson to the show.
Hi, everybody. And
Hello,
thank you.
Michelle. Thank you for coming on the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So, do you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
I sure can. I'm the last person that ever thought I would be doing anything like this. I'll be 60 in a year and a half, and I have had an interesting life. Lived in a lot of different places, and I think that helped me to wake up and unplug from the matrix that we live in, which is real. It's a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
People are labeled as conspiracy theorists by the establishment because there's things that people with alternative research and points of view are looking into that they don't want to come out. And, that pretty much characterizes what I stumbled across after a lifelong interest in hidden history and earth mysteries, that I was just really interested in it. And up until the internet, it was very hard to find. Mm-hmm. Maybe a book here or there. I watched Unsolved Mysteries as a teenager with Robert Stack. I loved In Search of with Leonard Nimoy. But there was just never enough information, right. Enough to whet your appetite. And it's like, I want to know more. And that didn't come until much later. But I was born in 1963. I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. in suburban Maryland. I lived in a place where going to college was more the rule than the exception. So like about 90% of high school graduates where I grew up went to college. And at that time in my life, it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I went to junior college for a year after I graduated from high school. And then I decided to join the Army. And that kind of set my path in a particular motion of not only moving around, but not being afraid of change, which is a big part of this. And I got, had the experience of living in different places and learning different histories and seeing a lot of the artifacts from the places that I was living. And then later on, I was able to kind of categorize the things that I saw when I was younger that I had questions about. And even on through my life. I was in the Army for 4 years. And after I got out, I went to college and got my degree in social work and psychology. And I worked as a professional geriatric social worker and activities director for about 13 years. So that was what I was trained in school. It wasn't in history, and that was a passion of mine, but I'm glad I didn't get classically trained in that because I don't think I would have been open to receive all the information that I've been sharing. And I got out of social work I was in it for about 13 years, and I got out of it in 2005, and I have never gone back into it. I kind of got burned out. My husband passed away in 2001, and I was burned out from that experience, and I got into a lot of different things. But I haven't worked professionally as a social worker for a long time. And I guess I've just really been drawn to this kind of information. I first read Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock around 2006. And that really got my interest. And I was able to start finding alternative books about, the pyramids of Giza being Orion's belt, a mirror of Orion's belt. And other books,
the different sizes of how it correlates to the Earth's what they say the shape of, or not the shape of the Earth, but the measurements of the Earth, how it lines up with the pyramids. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, I started to come into all of that information, exactly what you're saying. Fascinated. I learned about sacred geometry, which has helped me enormously with the work that I've been doing. I'm not a mathematician, but I do understand it intuitively. And that's what's really given me gave me the information that I needed to do my own research, which was, without the people that I mentioned, I would not have had this background of knowing that the same kinds of things were in different parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of dowsers, people looking at the earth energy currents, were coming up with a lot of information. Hugh Newman is one of them, and he organizes the Megalithomania conferences every year. And it was really finding the Megalithomania conferences in 2011 online that really started me into looking at more recent researchers looking at these kinds of things. And so, what I say is I stood on their shoulders. It was what prepared me, the education I needed in order to be able to start doing what I'm doing. That was part of it. And then another part of it was when I was living in Oklahoma between 2012 and 2016, I moved to there from Fairbanks, Alaska, to help my brother with my mom. And that was when I really started waking up to this ancient civilization. And it was something that once I started to see it, I would start noticing things in the environment. And then I met a Moorish American man who brought the stream about the Moors into my life, because I didn't know anything about the Moors before then. And then I started to realize that there was a very advanced human civilization on Earth that lined everything up perfectly according to sacred geometry and according to, the solar cycles, lunar cycles, constellations. Everything was in harmony and balance. Right. And then something happened.
Yeah, and that's something is the mystery we're all trying to figure out here. But you mentioned the Moors there, and I was just telling you, haven't gotten a chance to tell my audience this, but before the recording, I was telling you that the town that I'm from was called Prospect Park, and its name was changed to that from Moore, and it has a park called Moore's Lake, and it has the Morton Homestead, and down the street there's a town called Morton. Moortown comes to mind when I hear the word Morton, but it also brings to mind the word Mormon. Does the Mormon religion have anything to do with the Moors?
In the sense that I think they knew about the Moors. Okay. I think they were part of the cover-up. They talk about Israel in North America. Wow. And Joseph Smith talks about all of the Americas being Zion.
Wow.
I think they were part of the cover-up, what we would call controlled opposition.
Right.
And when you talk about any of the religions, organized religions, we're talking about the very top, a very small percentage of the hierarchy of the leadership that know about what's taken place here. It's no reference to, your everyday practitioners or anything like that. And probably most people who identify as Mormons, who identify as Catholics, who identify as Baptists, who identify as whatever, there was something that came in and kind of infiltrated what we know as religions. And and that's on top of secret societies like Skull and Bones and Freemasonry and things like that. Jesuits, they got into the top layer of these different organizations in terms of how they were actually able to pull this off.
Right. And now that's how we look around the world and we see that all these psychopaths rule all these countries and own all of these organizations and are all of the famous people. They're all psychopaths and they're all related. And it's like, how does that happen? Because they pulled the sheet over, they pulled the wool over our eyes, and with this dark energy, dark occultic magic of whatever they did, all these different things that they've done, and continue to do. It's very mind-boggling. Once you wake up to it, you're like, how did this happen?
Right. And we talked a little bit about it before. They created a cataclysm somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And I've speculated on some ideas on what I think might have happened, and some of them sound kind of out there, but what's really crazy is what's taken place here.
Right.
And how people have been programmed and mind controlled not to see what's actually in the environment around, not to ask questions, to blindly accept what they're told. And it's everywhere. This original highly advanced civilization, like the beautiful architecture behind you. You said that was in St. Augustine.
Yeah.
That was pre-existing. That was built by the original civilization. But everything in our plane of existence or reality, or whatever you want to call it, has a story to explain how it got there that has nothing to do with the actual builders of it.
Right. And they tell us that the Vikings were raping and pillaging, and they tell us that all these different places, all these different people were going around claiming things that weren't theirs. And we look at North America and we know, especially with the United States, we know that the stuff wasn't theirs, but they tell us that what they stole was land, that what they stole was that they were taking over savages who had teepees and huts, and they were hunter gatherers. And then we come to look at the world's fairs, and it's like, wait, how did all that stuff get there? How in the 1800s, within 2 years of each other, how did that happen? And all the reasonings they give us for that is so bogus. But before we get into that, okay, so I was just watching your video, and you have the hypothesis that there was some kind of time loop from 1492 to 1942, and it's odd enough that 1717 is directly in the middle, and that's when it's claimed that Freemasonry was started, which is very odd. So, do you want to go into that a little bit, your hypothesis on that?
Yes, I can do that. Let me just go over one thing before I do that.
Okay.
Because I'm going to kind of do it sequentially in terms of how I got started in my research. So can I share my screen? Is it set up for that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Yeah. So, like I said in the intro, I've been preparing for this kind of thing for a long time with my interests. And it's like I encountered everything I needed to know in order to be able to start putting the puzzle together. So a lot of synchronicities, a lot of being in the right place at the right time, being with the right people that ended up helping me out. And when I moved to Oklahoma City in 2012 to help my brother with my mom. And it was during that time, a period of between 2012 and 2016, when I was living there, that I started to wake up to all of this stuff, with my own research and not relying on other people's research. And I started to go look for things for myself. And you said you went to St. Augustine and looked around. The very best way to get information about this is to go and do field research.
Oh, yeah.
And actually go and see it. And when you start doing that, and this was what happened to me, is I started getting more information because I actually went to look at something instead of reading about it or looking at pictures. There's usually a ton more information on site that you're not going to be able to get some other way. So highly recommended. So anyway, a friend of mine that I was traveling with during that time to go look at some of these old places, old sites that we had questions about and interest in, gave me a map that she had ordered for me. And she said, I think you need this. And at the time I'm like, oh, okay, whatever, why, whatever. So I put it on a bulletin board and I had it set up on my dining room table, and I would look at it while I was eating meals. And I started to notice cities lining up in lines in North America, which is what these faint lines are. And then I noticed up here, this is Edmonton in Alberta, Canada. I started noticing all these major cities that were lining up in a line all the way to Ottawa. And then I found all these cities lining up in a line. And I knew about sacred geometry. So this is called a star tetrahedron, but it's also the Star of David. It's also known as the Merkaba. Mm-hmm. And I knew enough from the research that I've been watching to kind of have an idea of what I needed to be looking for in terms of, let's say, proportion between the two tetrahedrons here. So I found the first one, and then I looked for the second one, and I found it. And the bottom is in Chichen Itza in Merida, Mexico. Merida, but Chichen Itza is near there, which is a major site. And then I extended these lines out, and my focus isn't whether the earth is flat or round. I'm open to it. But in order to get the information I needed to get to continue to do my research, I needed to transfer that to a globe because I couldn't get to the other side based on a flat map. Okay. And so I superimposed it on a globe, and then I followed the alignments of cities and places that were lining up, sometimes in lines, sometimes in circles. And I wrote all these places down. Oh, wow. And that's the basis of my research. And, you know, I could have invested money into getting a computer program, but I figured I could spend the money on it and not be able to figure out how to use it. I spend more time trying to figure out how to use it than do it the old fashioned way.
Yeah, and your way, that'll last forever.
And here's the thing. I got so much information from this process when I wrote these places down, and then I started looking at pictures and drone videos, and I'm looking at everything and I'm thinking, wait a minute, everything looks the same everywhere. And I'm thinking, how am I going to show people what I'm seeing? Because I can't just tell you this. I have to show you what I'm seeing, because that's where it gets compelling. Right. You know, just to say it, the words don't do it justice. And so it took me about 2 years to actually get everything together well enough to make my first video and start blogging. And then I was only going to do one video, and somebody subscribed to my YouTube channel. So I decided, well, it's easy enough to convert my blog post into videos. And that was 3 years ago. And I've been putting out at least one a week average since that time. And I still have plenty of material. I mean, I can keep going on.
It's never ending with this. This topic is so deep. There's so much to it because it's, and I feel, so when I talk to somebody anymore and they want to talk about different things, I'm like, well, how does that fit in with this information? You know, because I want to know this first before, because this part of it from the 1500s on, that is something that is tangible to me. And once we go beyond that, it's questionable. And I hear about different things, and I'm like, well, I don't know if that's real because I have to figure out the last 500 years first. And I feel like this is probably in the Bible where it talks about that there's going to be all the old shall be made new, and that there's going to be things uncovered that have been hidden up. I feel like this is the tipping point, that once this is that we have a grasp, somewhat have a grasp on this, that the rest is just going to fall in line from there.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and that's one of the many motivations for why I do this. You know, another reason is we've all been so lied to and divided by race and religion, and everybody's been lied to. You know, so you have the whole black versus white dichotomy and all the hatred that's pushed. It's fabricated, it's manufactured. There's no difference. It's all part of the manipulation to have us harm each other instead of noticing who's actually behind it, who's actually doing it. And they're actually beings that can't touch us.
Right.
They can't do it themselves. So it's like they've rigged the system to get it to where we do it to ourselves. And they just, make money hand over fists with all of their distractions, with, addictive substances and car racing and gambling. And, it's really all tied together. And it's really about keeping us, our focus away from higher things.
Yeah.
Higher pursuits.
Yeah, you can only have your mind on one thing at a time, and if you're not thinking about God, you're thinking something's distracting you from it. And it's not necessarily that you're thinking about a certain thing when you think about God, but just the entirety of God and what that actually includes, and the loving, peaceful nature that we could have if we were all had God in mind.
That we inherently have.
Right.
And I like your great chakra awakening, because they've got us stuck in our lower chakras.
That's right.
In the lower aspects of our lower chakras.
Yeah, playing around in all the sin,
Yeah.
it's the devil's playground when we could be, doing things so much better, so much more to life. Like, we don't have to have people slaving away doing menial tasks for everybody else. And even though people say it's not slavery because you're making money, it's debt slavery. It's, you're agreeing to work forever, basically.
Right.
And there's a better way than this.
Yeah, it's all part of a system that's been designed to keep us on a hamster wheel, literally. And so to get back to your question about the time loop, so I was doing this for about a year. I knew there was a connection between 1492, which was the same year as the fall of Granada, and the fall of the Moors in Spain. And the 700 years in Spain is the only credit they get in the historical record. And 1942, which was midway through, actually the exact midpoint between the beginning and end of World War II. And when I first started researching it, it was the year of the Philadelphia experiment. Now, more often than not, you see 1943. But I'm kind of leaning towards 1942, because I really feel like these dark forces are really into occult numerology, and that they did something to mess with the timeline, so that they could come in and set up this rigged system that we live in. And my research kind of jives with yours. So that's about a 500-year period. There's 450 years between 1492 and 1942, plus where we're living in now. So that's about 500 years. Now, I tend to take it a little further, and I think anything from, let's say, mid to late 1700s on happened. It's their version of us telling us what they did.
Okay.
How they came in, how they explored, how they took over.
His story.
Yeah.
Right. His story, not my story or our story, but his story. Right. And I have serious doubts about anything before that time period actually having happened in terms of what we're taught in history. There was a history before then, but it was very different from what we've been told. And I think they did a lot to backfill the historical record, so they could fill in all the pieces. And a lot of people are familiar with I think it's Anatoly Fomenko,
Right.
and the work that he's done on timelines, and Scaliger and Patel, the Jesuits who were like the fathers of modern chronology. And, you know, they might have been sitting in their room, swigging a drink and, okay, we're going to change this way.
Right.
Something like that. Something happened. They rewrote everything to make it fit what they wanted us to think about our history and who we are. And so they took credit for all,
right.
They took credit for the architecture, or they gave it credit to different people. They didn't give it to the people that actually built it.
Right. And then you look at the Freemasons, and they're the hidden hand, they're the builders, they're the architects of society. This is how they view themselves. They look at themselves like, oh, we created all of this for you, and then we're somehow we aren't worthy of knowing the truth, that we have to just look at it the way they have. But you said a time loop, which is very interesting, because it would make sense that it would be something along those lines. Do you think that we've been living, maybe we're outside of it now, but was there a certain period of time where we were reliving the same events over and over?
That's kind of where I wasn't really sure. And I kind of landed on what I just said about,
okay,
everything from a certain point happened, and before a certain point,
right.
I don't think so. Having said that, it's possible that they somehow ran us through history again. But I'm seeing more and more evidence that they created a catastrophe that caused a flood of mud. They wiped out the physical surface population, and then they dug everything out. And our history is actually about coming out of the mud flood event,
right,
and into the civilization that we have today. And that's, again, that sounds crazy, but the evidence is there, especially when you look at historical pictures, what they tell us about different places and what we see today. And I'm going to give you the example of trolley cars, canals, somewhere around 1850. And I think that's kind of like when this thing officially got kicked off, this new world order timeline. You see pictures in big cities like Boston and so forth. You see mules and horses that are pulling trolley cars. And within 20 years or so, the historical record says, oh, we got these trolley lines electrified. And there were these remarkable trolley lines, and interurbans, they were called, going all over the country. Starting between, say, 1870 and 1900-ish is when they started getting these trolley lines that they had laid all this track down for.
But they probably just dug out
the electricity going. And then Henry Ford invents the mass-produced Model T. And then they get, cars and trucks going. And then the trolley cars are gone. The interurbans are gone. They were everywhere. They've taken the tracks out. They were, all throughout Florida and Tampa and Miami. They might have a little part of what used to exist functional, but there were trolleys everywhere. There was the system that was already in existence, and it was based on free energy. And that's another component to all of this highly advanced civilization that was here before. So they're telling us, okay, we built these trolley lines. We had to use horses and mules, but we got them electrified. And then 20, 30, 40 years later, didn't need them anymore.
Right. Are you familiar with the Carrington event in 1859?
I've heard of it. I haven't studied a lot. I'm open to, multiple causes of whatever took place.
Well, I think that was some kind of switcheroo or something. There was some kind of electrical anomaly that changed our universe from the free energy universe that it was to the fake energy that we're on now. After 1859, the Carrington event. After that, we started the seasonal flu, started in 1860. Anxiety and depression started in like 66 and 67. And we're electrical beings. We're in an electrical universe. And that type of electrical anomaly occurring, I think, completely shifted the atmosphere in which we live in, and which maybe those things couldn't work the way that they used to. So then they made the new way, maybe because they were harnessing it for themselves somehow. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah. And they're still harnessing this energy for
Right.
themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, I have no doubt about that. They've removed all of this from our awareness. We don't know. We don't know anything about this. But there's evidence. There's evidence in your towns, in the older buildings in your towns, the courthouses, the historical record. You know, if you go to Walgreens or CVS or Walmart, you'll see books called Images of America, and a lot of small towns, cities have, you know, these books with historical pictures. Go look through them and see what it says.
I gotta give me one of them books.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, so and so is the founder of the city, and you know, within 20 years of the founding of the city, there was this boom. Oh, and maybe there was a fire or a flood.
Right.
And
then we have the next World Fair.
You know, and you know, in a way, it's they're telling us what they want us to believe about the world that we live in. But once you start looking into it, it all starts to fall apart. They're cover stories.
Right.
And it doesn't explain how, what's the name of the building that you have showing?
So this is the the Presbyterian Church. Yeah, I think this is the Presbyterian Church. Hold on. Get into the mic.
Yeah, Memorial Presbyterian Church.
Did they give you a date on when it was said to have been built?
No, we didn't see one for that, but what we saw for Flagler College was between 1885 and 1887, which was the Ponce de Leon Hotel, and they said they made it in 2 years, and it's like, no, you didn't. You couldn't make the roadways in 2 years.
Right, and that's the kind of thing that you look for. Does the date match the construction that you're looking at?
Right,
and they will have a date. They'll even have a date scratched, you know, carved into the cornerstone or above the door.
yeah, there might have been, but I didn't get it because they were having church when we were going by, so I didn't want to disturb them too much.
Constructed in 1889 is what Google is handing me.
And all the World's Fairs, they say were all constructed in between 1.5 to 2.5 years, and it's impossible. There is no way. And then they say, oh, it was paper mache that we made it with. Which, okay, then how are there still buildings standing? Because you said, oh, we converted this into a real building. You know, we didn't do anything. We just converted it into the local Congress building, you know. So what really got me interested in this, and anyone who's listening who isn't familiar with this at all, is the columns. If you look at all these buildings, government buildings around the country, they all have these columns. And why do they all look like Greek buildings? Why do they all have all the government buildings? And not just that, but there's schools, high schools, there's colleges, you know, like I just said, Flagler College. Why are they all Greco-Roman style buildings? Yeah.
Museums.
Yeah, plenty of museums, yeah.
Theaters. You know, it's just, it really doesn't make sense, but we haven't been told anything else. And so we accept it until one day.
Right. And even
something changes that.
When we have the cathedrals and the mosques, which, okay, they tell us that's religious stuff and everyone goes along with it. And okay, I don't want to say that it's not. But when you start to look into sound patterns, how the, what are they called?
The stained glass windows?
Yeah, when you have the stained glass windows and how they have, when you put different little grains of sand or something on a speaker and different frequencies will turn it into different, what's going on here? Is your phone, move your phone, please. Yeah. So the different frequencies will turn the sand into different shapes. And you look at the way that it matches up with cathedrals, and oh, it's exactly the same. So if there was no stained glass window in there, then the wind would be producing a sound. And if they had maybe on the top, all those spires that are on top, maybe they're to catch the lightning, and maybe there's water housed in there, and the water is then being electrified and producing steam into the big domes, and that's what that's for. And then you have a little ball for mercury in it, and it's the entire shape of all of it is for energy. It is to harness energy
and frequency.
Mm-hmm.
The cathedral rose windows are like solfeggio frequencies, which are healing frequencies.
Yeah.
Right.
And then there's like I would hazard to say probably in every building that has that type of window, there's an organ underneath it, and the organ goes right up to the window, and there's different shapes for each building. And it wasn't just churches that had these windows, it was other buildings as well. And a lot of those buildings have been torn down, but somehow they were, I think, harmonizing everything with sound and frequency through these windows in these buildings that were perfectly designed and perfect acoustics. And I tend to think of them as places where people could go and just kind of harmonize together.
Yeah.
And that these frequencies were benefiting everybody and everything.
Right. And when people praise, in church, they all have their hands up like as if they are an antenna. You put your hands up to the sky because it's the energy is flowing through the ground, through your hands up to the sky, and the opposite, because we are channels. We are different frequencies. We're supposed to receive information in our way. And what better way than to have these huge buildings that are helping it facilitate it through natural processes with the winds, as you're saying, going through the windows that are going into the organs and helping, and all sorts of different things. I mean, it must have been so beautiful that they would spend so much energy and time into making their buildings look the way they do, and they stand today stronger than the buildings that we make today.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me share my screen and see what I can find here to kind of show some things, because I've done a lot of got into doing a lot of research on that and exploring the idea of Earth as a circuit board, which I believe it was originally designed as a circuit board, and again, the controllers that came in, they've been utilizing that energy in a reverse kind of way from what it was originally. We think we're supposed to be, suffering and miserable, and if we happen to have a good life or a good time, it's like, oh well, that's luck of the draw. But I think we're supposed to have good lives, of abundance.
I agree.
not misery and suffering and all the wars. I think the wars have part of this manipulation of not only humanity to fight each other, but also to destroy this original infrastructure.
Exactly. Well, you see, Afghanistan just got given back all their different art and artifacts that were stolen from them during the 2000s and since, I guess, since we went in there for no reason.
Yeah, it's really complicated. I just want to show you this. This is one of the things. So this is a cathedral, and I can't read the Latin, but just to kind of give you an idea of the perfect geometries of how everything lines up with each other, in this schematic of a cathedral.
And in today's day and age, we don't question architecture at all. So many people go to church and they're like, oh yeah, that's nice looking, but they don't realize that it's a sacred geometrical way of designing it in order for frequencies to come in and exit in a way that we and it and the entire earth are all designed for.
Exactly. And here's another example, just to give you an idea of the relationship between frequency and these buildings. I mean, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Oh, wow.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Wow, that's amazing.
Dear Ray, a drop of golden sun. So we learn it, but we don't know what we're, the information we're getting. And that's part of this also, is the beings behind this have to tell us what they're doing, but they hide it and they don't tell us that they're telling us. So,
Right.
We go to a movie, and some of the stuff they disclose in movies, and, I don't know anybody that goes to a movie thinking, oh, well, they just told me something.
Well, that's what I do now. I don't watch much TV or movies, but when I do, I'm looking for something. I want to know, like, what are they revealing to me through this? I'm not watching, like, I see what's happening on the screen, and I'm like, yeah, that's cool and all, but I'm looking for the hidden information. The Stanley Kubrick information that's encoded in the background. That's the real truth.
So, this is an example again of like I said, the frequency, and then you see the windows, and this is what you're talking about with the cymatics.
Right. Cymatics.
That's what, if you apply sound to sand, it'll form these different patterns, or water even.
Mm-hmm.
So it's encapsulated in these windows. These windows below are also serving some kind of function, like an antenna of some kind. Just trying to think. Oh, and then they make us, through compulsory education, they make us learn their history, all the stuff that they want us to know and believe. And they, a lot of people are able to homeschool, but it's not something every parent wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
And compulsory education started around the 1850s, which is when I think this whole thing got underway. The Rockefellers were behind general education in the United States, especially.
Right.
I'm just trying to think of what's in this particular section that I can give you an example.
Well, and to go with the education, they had the orphan trains that were happening right around that time as well, which is, that, and not just the orphan trains, but the what's it called? Like the psych wards that went along with it, and they're all castles as well. And it's like, it really disturbs me when I think about that. They probably killed and experimented on a lot of people and then stole their kids from them and then re-educated them into thinking that something that wasn't true was true. And then they grew up teaching their kids that, when, and so on and so forth. And it really disturbs me when I start to think about that.
Yeah, it is very disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
The way that I look at it, the 19th century was a complete mess for humanity. And that was when all that stuff was happening. And that was when they were starting to bring in beer and hard alcohol on a massive scale. I mean, everywhere they, founded a town, they founded a brewery or a distillery. And after a while, they have a problem with, drunkards and insane people. And, and then they have to warehouse people. But I mean, that was what the controllers had these people that they had to do something with. Mm-hmm. They don't like us. They look at us as being really beneath them. Right. And these are, I think, satanic and demonic beings, have nothing but contempt for humanity. But they had to get it set up. They couldn't just come in and do it because they needed our consent. They had to have our consent.
Now, why do you think that is?
Because of free will.
Okay.
So they couldn't just come in and do what they wanted to do right off the bat. They had to go through this backdoor, elaborate way of getting what they wanted. And, so again, we've been educated in what they want us to believe. And We pay for our mind control when we go to movies, or, when we go to games or watch movies, or, excuse me if I'm repeating myself, but we pay for our poisons with our alcohol and with all of the big pharma medications that we're given because they don't make alternative healing modalities easily accessible. They're out there, but you have to pay privately. Insurances don't pay for them. So anyway, they're getting rich
right,
off of those of us on the hamster wheel that also have to pay taxes on the money that we do earn,
right,
and the products that we do buy.
And then you have Stockholm syndrome, and you have the oppressed protecting the oppressors and standing up for them, saying, no, that can't be true. If it was true, I would know. It would be on the news. If this was true, what you're saying, it would be in my history book. And
right.
if it's the same people, if it's the same family of people or same group of people that are doing this, why would it be in your history book? That's the first thing they would do, is teach you the lies so that they could then implement in the future. You would be asking for them to take your freedoms from you, because you're a dumb human and you're just going to mess everything up.
Right. And I guess the benefit to doing this kind of work right now is that people with eyes to see can actually see that happening. People trading freedom for security, even though it's not really security. It's just a control. But that's, again, that's part of how we've been conditioned for decades now.
Right.
And this is the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. So that's what I was talking about with the organ right up against the cathedral window.
That's so cool.
Right, because the glass didn't used to be there. That was put in there to cover up the open hole. Correct?
Possibly. I think it might have been. And,
yeah, I think so.
I haven't really looked into this aspect of the stained glass, but
I believe it would have to be open for it to make the sound it needs to make. There wouldn't have to be no glass there.
It's a good question. I don't really know. The only thing that I would say is that I think there's something to do with color too.
Okay.
But I don't know how that works.
I think what I read is that they didn't used to be churches, so they used the stained glass as the cover up to make it the church. Right. So it wasn't necessarily a church to begin with.
It was a healing
It's a church after.
Okay.
Yeah, but it does make sense in what she's saying with the colors, because anyone that's been on a psychedelic trip, I mean, you're seeing these types of shapes and colors and different things. So, it's many different possibilities. And I mean, the stained glass is just as beautiful as the rest of it. So maybe it was that way, maybe not.
And really, I mean, there's so many things we're just guessing about. Other than there's stuff that really needs to be looked at critically.
Right.
And it's not just accept what
beautiful stained glass window there.
So you've got the organ, and organs are massive instruments and hard to play.
Yeah.
So again, I think we're looking at a pre-existing sound technology. You've got the bells, you've got the arches, the vaulted ceilings, and these are all over the place. Again, the stories of when a lot of these places, especially in North America, were built. Notre Dame was supposed to have been built hundreds of years ago, and the ones in the US were said to have been built within the last, 100 to 200 years. And they're the same thing, which is kind of what you're talking about.
Right.
With the architecture.
And hey, they have all the stuff in France with all the churches. All them old school churches in France are being burned down by quote unquote Muslim terrorists, right? Or is it just someone is saying it's Muslim terrorists?
I think that was part of how they were going to take everything out, was just, using religions to accomplish this. And when I say they, I mean, I think it was I'm pretty sure at this point it was like a Freemasonic kind of plan. I've seen Albert Pike's name associated with, this World War I, World War II, World War III. And World War III has a lot to do with pitting the Zionists against the Islamists. And they were going to mutually destroy each other.
Yeah. So you think that it was the Freemasons? I agree that I think the Freemasons are a big part of this. And so Albert Pike, if anyone's not familiar, he is like one of the fathers of Freemasonry, right? Like he was a big time guy in there.
He was a big time guy. So this is the one I'm talking about if I can find it.
Okay.
Shoot. These little rabbit trails want to take you somewhere you don't want to go. Okay. So this is what he's attributed to saying in a letter to Giuseppe Mazzini, who was, I want to say he was involved with the Italian Illuminati. And these guys were big during the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. And that's when I think a lot of this stuff was going on. And I did actually find a reference to the letter that he was supposed to have made these references to the world wars in. When I first was looking at it, I didn't have that information. I have since found a source talking about this letter that he actually wrote to Mazzini, that they were contemporaries, they knew each other, that there was this plan that was going on. If you've heard the term Illuminati or Cabal. So the Third World War must be fomented. I'm sorry. Let me see if I can find an example that's going to make it bigger.
Yeah, and the Illuminati was created 1776, and that's when the United States was allegedly created. And that brings up a lot of questions with that as well.
Maybe that's a better one. Okay, this is a better one. It's got all that other stuff in it. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agents of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. This war must be conducted in such a way that Islam and political Zionism mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. And I really think that's a really apt description of the last 40 years.
Right.
I mean, I've started looking at history with new eyes, and I graduated from high school in 1981, and it was in that same year that what I was seeing, all hell broke loose. I mean, that was when suicide bombings started to get underway. That's when AIDS came on the scene. Nightclubs blowing up. There's so many different things going on that was like this worldwide terror attack. But then you start to see these, radical Islamic groups starting to take shape and form. That's part of it. But there's other terrorist organizations that are bombing things as well. So we started seeing this mass terrorism come around 1980. It hasn't stopped.
Right.
But that's about when it showed up. And before that time, it was a lot of civil war type things going on in different parts of the world, more local things in Africa and like Northern Ireland, and what was going on there between Catholics and Protestants. But it all looks like, from what I'm seeing in the historical record, that it was like manipulated and engineered so they would fight each other.
Right.
And that happened in Korea, that happened in Vietnam, an artificial division of the country. And then the North becomes communist and socialist, and the South becomes capitalist. And then this is in Korea and Vietnam. And then, light the match and start the fire. And you've got the Korean War and the Vietnam War.
Wow.
All artificial divisions and artificially caused.
So where do you think you were talking earlier that you have maybe some outlandish ideas of where these people came from? Now, I always love saying outlandish things on my show. And
Okay.
I just had a bonus episode number 6 with Mimi and I talked about how it I got this vision and it was it looked like a Star Wars-esque thing that happened between the 1500s and 1800s around there, that somehow something that looked like the moon to me swung in, hit the firmament, and somehow, uh, when that happened is when these beings came in. And then today, for no reason at all, I started thinking about what were the Dark Ages. Maybe the Dark Ages were when the fallen came back. In the Bible it says they were in the Nephilim were here before the flood and then after. Maybe the after is the Dark Ages. Yeah, so I love saying outlandish things. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, and there's so many different possibilities, but my outlandish thing is that, and this is because of how my research has unfolded. I really do think there was a connection between the Philadelphia experiment and what's called the Great Frost of Ireland, which took place between 1740 and 1741. It was 21 months of extremely cold weather that's in the historical record. And that occultists caused the Philadelphia experiment. Aleister Crowley was involved, and he's a very bad man.
Oh, I never heard that. That's interesting.
Peter Moon talks about that in his books.
Oh, wow.
And, this Philadelphia experiment, generated these incredible amounts of energy. It disappeared, the ship, the USS Eldridge, I want to say for 15 minutes, 15 something, not 15 hours. Might have been 15 minutes, possibly 15 seconds, but it was 15. It disappeared. And then it came back, and the sailors were reported to have been embedded in the ship. They were disoriented. And what we're told is it was like a cloaking experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think it happened. Some people are like, well, that never happened. But I think it did happen. And I had encountered some information about the Philadelphia experiment years ago, which probably planted a seed. And I learned about so how I learned about the Great Frost of Ireland was a psychic friend of mine came to visit me. I live in Sedona, so that's not uncommon here. And she said, oh, I see your guides. They're trying to tell me something. They want you to know what you're mulling is correct. And that was the time loop between 1492 and 1942. Wow. And they also want me to tell you something. And that was, she got a vision of Ireland that was green and sunny in 1743. And before that, it was cold and frozen. And so I don't get information like that, but what I did was I looked up Ireland in 1743. And the two things that came up was Handel's Messiah premiered in Dublin in 1742, like April of 1742. Georg Friedrich Handel's Messiah oratorio that you hear at Christmas. Hallelujah. Premiered in Dublin in 1742. Was one thing that came up. And the other thing that came up was the Great Frost of Ireland. Nothing else came up. And there's a lot of weirdness around Handel as well. I found when I started to look into that. So anyway, that led me to the Great Frost of Ireland and the idea that caused a rip in the fabric of space-time. And that was when these souls came in. Now, there was a movie called The Final Countdown, and it was about a time-traveling naval vessel. that went from like the 80s to 1941, before Pearl Harbor, like the day before Pearl Harbor. So 1941, 1741. I mean, these guys like their numbers.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's as crazy as it sounds, other than, I can't prove it. But what I can say is that Mayor Rothschild, the first banking Rothschild, came in 1744. Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati that you talked about, in 1776, he was born in 1748. And Duke Francis of Saxe-Coburg and Saalfeld was born in Germany in 1750. All three of these men were born in Germany. Duke Francis was the beginning of the royal lines of Europe. So we're talking, that was the lineage that seeded the new royal houses of Europe, mainly through Victoria and Albert, who were first cousins.
Do you think these people got pulled back and pulled into that time from 1941? Or?
No. I think something caused a rip in the fabric of space-time, which is what I think caused that cold spell in Ireland.
Right.
And it was through that rip in the fabric of space-time that these beings were able to incarnate, which is not that different from what you saw with the break in the firmament.
Right.
I'm calling it a rip in the fabric of space-time. Now, there certainly could have been something on the other side, some kind of, Death Star type vessel.
Right. That maybe that's how they did it.
Assisted it.
Right.
But something happened around that time, and they're up to their eyeballs in what's been going on here.
Yeah, and when we have the World War II, we had all, what were they called? All those little, they saw a bunch of spaceships, everybody, all the Air Force of all the different countries. Well, I forget what they called them. Sorry, go ahead.
So in 1942 was also when all the genocide started. Again, this is what we're told in World War II. It was after a certain convention in 1942 that they started implementing their, concentration camp plan and, killing all these people. That started in 1942.
Yeah, it was the Foo Fighters is what I was talking about, how they saw all the Foo Fighters in World War II, that in 1942 is when this was going on. So that's interesting. Did they open up? Like you said, did it open up something and allow something else to come in? That's incredibly informative right there.
And there's a lot of little details that you can find in the historical record. There's the stuff that just doesn't make sense, like when you're dating a building and you look at it and you say, how in the heck did they build that when, we didn't even have cars,
right.
Or, see a big, beautiful building in a historical picture and it's all dirt and people are driving their horse and buggies right past. But in terms of just little bits and pieces of information that support what I'm talking about are available. And I've done quite a bit of work to pull those together. But also when you get into the backstory of what's actually happening on Earth now to humanity, and the problem with, child trafficking. I don't know how much you go into that or how much you know about that. There's just all kinds of little things that point towards the involvement of these bloodline families, the rich ones, the ones we hear about, the big names that own the food companies and the chemical companies, the DuPonts and the Heinzes and, the whole thing. The ones that came in and built from the ground up on the reset to control everything and put things on our food and, target our kids. I mean, there's pedophilia signs symbols on Disney, at Disney attractions.
All over it.
I mean,
and Walt Disney was great friends with different Nazis. This is
yeah,
it's so much.
Helped design some of the World's Fair exhibits.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it really goes deep, but they're very much behind the darker side of what's been going on to individual humans during this same time period. It's the same people that are behind the reset, that are behind the child trafficking and worse. What happens to the kids when they get trafficked, or there's just so much going on. And they're not human.
Right.
They're not human. They're not human.
You're big into thinking that it's the fallen angels and or demons, something to that effect.
I think they're part of it. I mean, I do think I don't think we're alone in the universe, and I do think there's negative ETs that have a beef with goodness and creation. But they want that for themselves. They can't do it, so they have to do it synthetically.
Mm-hmm.
They have to get it from other sources. So they've got the intelligence to like reverse engineer it and figure all this stuff out, but they don't have the organic.
Yeah, they can't create.
Yeah, creative powers that humans do. And so they get it all synthetically, whether, literally or figuratively.
Yeah, I think everything is an extension. All the evil is an extension of the fallen angels. I've been studying the Book of Enoch. I'm having a round table tomorrow with a bunch of people on the Nephilim and the fallen angels and secret societies. And, everything secret societies do, it's what the Book of Enoch said that the fallen angels were doing. And it's literally everything. They say that they were messing with the DNA of humanity and that of the reptiles, the bees, the birds, of everything. And if you were to take the description of any alien being, and there's many of them, but if you take a description of any of them and you say, oh, it's part human and part this, how could that be? Well, the Book of Enoch says because they took the DNA from humans and animals and combined them, and that's how you have all the aliens.
And our DNA is very special.
Mm-hmm. It is
very special, and so we're like a hot commodity that way.
Yeah.
And we don't know how special that is, how special we are. So and the Book of Enoch is significant. I haven't actually read it, but I know of it, and I know a lot about what's in it. And it was taken out of the canonical Bible. And I think it was a Freemason by the name of William Bruce or John Bruce or something like that, that went to Ethiopia, where it is in the Canaan, and brought it back to the West, like in the 1800s.
Was it Freemasons brought it back?
I believe so.
Wow, I haven't come across that. That's
so check out Bruce. Let me check out Bruce. That's a bit of old information. Say Bruce in the Book of Enoch. James Bruce in the Book of Enoch.
Okay.
And that was in okay, so he died in 1794, so I was wrong on the dates.
Surrounded by conspiracy theories, rumors of Masonic influence, and colonial interference.
So he was the one that went to he was the one that went to Ethiopia and brought back the Book of Enoch.
Google says he stole it. Stole the Book of Enoch.
He probably, well, obviously that's what he did. Yeah.
Okay.
It's crazy.
So you can look that up, but he's the one that brought it back because it wasn't here. And I would say for those that are interested, it's all there.
Yeah.
All that you need to know is in the Book of Enoch. And honestly, I think it's also in Paradise Lost, which is John Milton's poem.
Paradise Lost.
Yeah.
You writing that down? Yeah, I want to look into that because, yeah, I mean, the Book of Enoch has all of it. It's just our understanding of things, especially with the Bible, is we have no imagination these days. And that's partially because of the ugly buildings that we have, that we don't have the capacity for beauty and imaginative things. So when someone says something that's meant to take literal and they're like, oh, that's just a metaphor for this, and it's like, no, take it all very literal, and then it makes more sense than saying this is a metaphor, but this is literal, but this is, take it all literal, you know.
And I can tell you, as somebody who really, for most of my life, so I'll be 60 in a year and a half. So let's say it took me until about the age of 55 to really come down on the side of these fallen angels are literal beings, and evil literally exists. And when we talk evil, we're talking great evil.
Mm-hmm.
It stands against everything, God and humanity stand for, true humans, love and compassion and caring and truth and beauty. It really exists. And so, for a while, it's like, oh, well, no, evil's a concept.
Right.
No. Evil's, people would be horrified if what's been going on here became commonly known. And the reason it hasn't been commonly known is because of censorship. The people that are talking about it getting, deplatformed. It's not talked about in the mainstream media, I think, because they're complicit. The criminals don't want to be caught.
Exactly.
For what they've done. They just want to be able to keep on committing their crimes, which they're doing right up to this minute.
Yeah, it's interesting you said it was a few years ago, because it was 2016. Buzz Aldrin was in Antarctica, and he tweeted out that it's evil itself, and something along the lines of, this is going to be the end. And then he had this medical emergency, and it was in Antarctica. And when you're talking about evil, and you said this was a few years ago that you woke up to this was right around that time. And this is when I think the awakening really started shifting in everybody, was around that time. Was something in Antarctica? Were the Watchers frozen in Antarctica, and now it is melting and they are being released? They are the evil that he was talking about.
Along those lines, but I haven't studied it closely at all, okay. But I'm aware of a lot. And so one of the things that I saw was there's a description of where they live in the Book of Enoch that matches Antarctica. I saw a video about that, or a podcast about that.
I'll have to check that out.
Check that out. And you might want to just search for that in YouTube.
Okay.
Antarctica is where the Watchers live, or something along those lines.
Yeah, we were talking Terra del Fuego, the land of fire. Hell is hot, extremely hot. And there's also in South America, the land of the giants is, I forget.
Probably Patagonia.
Yeah, Patagonia. Yeah, the land of the giants. That's all. And where did the Nazis go when they escaped? They went to Argentina, which is the tip of South America, with Terra del Fuego.
And I'm of the opinion that the Nazis have been with us for a long time, well before World War II and well after, and that they're part of, the people behind it that I was talking about. I think Zionism is the umbrella term for these evil beings in this alliance to take down humanity and the creator, and replace the creator with Satan or Lucifer or whoever. I've heard there's a difference between Satanism and Luciferianism. So whatever, they want to replace it with their guy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they needed our consent to do this. We have to consent to that.
Yeah,
and people don't know what they're consenting to.
Right.
Even when they get the vaccine, they're consenting to something major.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't know it because it's presented as a health issue. But there's something going into everybody that gets that's not good.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that the way that you just worded that, because my morning meditation, I saw that crosses were falling off of Catholic churches, and it was specifically the Vatican, and it was more clear to me than my meditations. I don't typically see things, I just know them, and I get a general sense, but I was literally seeing them as if I was in a deep, deep meditation, because I do a daily meditation every day. I don't go all that deep. But this one, I could see the structure, the outside structure so clearly, and the cross fell off, and what arose was like what they really worshipped, rose up, and it was the devil, as we call it. I don't know how to describe it otherwise.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. Again, when I give these examples, we're talking of a very, very, very small percentage of people hiding in major religions.
Right.
And I showed this, I think I showed this on the Tinfoil Hat podcast. So it's truly hidden in plain sight. I'm gonna put this over here.
Yeah, and this isn't religion as cover.
And this isn't the only place that you see it.
Right.
I mean, you see the reptile imagery here with the eyes and the fangs and the head. But what I want to, the reason I'm bringing this up is the Papal Throne is right between the two fangs here.
Mm-hmm.
The Papal Throne is the most bizarre sculpture.
So ugly.
Ever.
Yeah, it's called the Resurrection.
Ever.
It looks like the resurrection of the dead.
And the Jesus in it has a forehead that's like elongated. And then I'm looking for the description of it because it's crazy.
It is crazy. We have Quetzalcoatl. Are you familiar with Quetzalcoatl? He's like the Jesus of the West, essentially, and he was half reptilian. He was the feathered serpent. He had all the same characteristics as Jesus, up until a certain point. He was like his exact opposite.
So what I was looking for here, and there's so many different things. This sculpture intended to capture the anguish of 20th century mankind living under the threat of nuclear war. It depicts Jesus rising from a nuclear crater in the Garden of Gethsemane. That's behind the Papal Throne. And I'm going to find a bigger image because it's crazy.
What's around his body on the lower half?
It's like I didn't even know what to say. The art behind here, it says right down here, the art behind the Pope's throne depicts Jesus rising from a nuclear bomb crater. Something's wrong with that.
Yeah.
And whatever you said reminded me of that specifically because.
Yeah, it's like they're not to me, the way I interpret what I saw is that it's they're going to be more open about it, that it's going to be a big transfer of, and especially now they said no one can come in unless you're vaccinated, which if we're godly people, we're supposed to have faith that everything will work out the way it's supposed to, that God's always in control, and that we don't need to do things like that, given that it's has such a high uh, rate of getting rid of it on natural immunity and using. There are other things, and I don't even want to get into that, but
Yeah.
it's just the whole fear thing. Everything in the Catholic
Exactly.
Church is out of fear, shame, and guilt. Not everything, but a lot of it, and they're really, really pushing that, and that they're going to really show their cards and who they worship.
And I just think that's kind of something to keep in mind. Is I think a lot of people are resisting, and so they push even harder, and they bring in even harder guns. Okay, but it's about control. It's
Right.
about control. All of this is just consider it a psychological operation and biowarfare, because that thing puts things in your body you don't want, and it changes your DNA. And they have this transhumanism goal, and I don't know if you study transhumanism, Todd, but that's part of it also.
Yeah, and actually, when you bring that up, that brings to thought that I saw, I don't know if this is true, but that the Vatican is going to be having some kind of meeting, online meeting, invite only, about two authors who wrote the book called The Transhuman Code. It's coming, I think, October 23rd. They're having that Zoom meeting. I don't know if it's true. Anyone could have made that flyer that I saw, but, it's very interesting.
And also, for those that might be interested in learning more about it, look up Chrislam.
Chrislam?
Chrislam.
Oh, is that KR?
No. The New World Order's one world religion is Chrislam.
Oh, like Christian and Islam.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Chrislam. Okay. I've never heard of this term. Well.
I'm going to share my screen one more time.
Okay.
And just show you.
You are killing it tonight. You're showing me so much new stuff. I
Chrislam.
love it. Wow.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Chrislam.
Moon and the cross.
Well, we had last year the Pope and the one of the imams and another religious leader. They all met at the table of
Deception of Chrislam.
Wow. I have to look into this.
So that's just a little something to investigate there.
Yeah. Well, this is all. There's so much to all of this, and I'm so glad that I'm getting to learn it at this time. This world, even though as crazy as it is, I often forget what's going on because I don't watch the news. I'm not on the social media that's having people talk about this thing, so it often is in one ear out the other. I see something and then I just let it go, and then I'm researching, and then something big happens and it all lines up.
And I think a big takeaway from what we're talking about today is this is not about fear.
Right.
This is not about fear at all. We're going to have a much better ending than what was planned. It's important to know these things, because if you don't know about it, then you're not going to know how close we've been to the brink
right.
of annihilation by these beings that really hate humanity and hate the Creator and want to replace with their own guy. They want to replace God with their guy. We don't want their guy,
right,
at all. And the worst part of it is people don't know what's going on because of the lies and the deceptions. And we're living in biblical times.
Yes.
I think what we're going to see is miraculous. The things that are going to start coming out more and more. And Todd, you're part of it. I'm part of it. Everybody that's, getting out there on the horn that's never podcasted before in their life. And, before 2018, I never made a video in my life. I never blogged in my life. People waking up to what's going on, the Great Awakening.
Right.
And that's huge because they can't do what they've done. It's all wrong. It's all criminal.
Yeah.
Can't do that. And so something, and I think God's got something really big in store as we move through these times.
Have you come across the theory that we're in a post-rapture world, that the second coming has already happened, and that the third coming is, or the second judgment is the third coming, or the final judgment?
I haven't, but I think we're right in the middle of something.
Yeah,
that's what I think.
yeah,
Whatever that is.
I feel that.
Yeah.
Whether we're in the middle of the tribulation.
Yeah.
We're in it already.
Yeah. I think. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, we're there. Yeah. And so the trick is not going into fear. Keep living your life, the right way.
Right.
And not to give into fear, because that's their only power. That's all they've got.
Yeah. So, you bring up a good point that you're supposed to just live it in a certain way. And we do want to hold our ground and not let them just steamroll over us. But we also don't want to go doing it in a way that we're then attacking and doing it, playing into their game, because then we're not playing by the rules, and then we can get thrown into prison. We can have a whole lot of different things happen to us if we don't play by the quote unquote play by the rules. There's a very fine line of doing things and making videos for, every week that you're doing, and doing podcasts and all. This is a way of doing it by spreading information, because once enough people are armed with knowledge, then they can say no. That once they know what they're consenting to, they say no, we're not consenting any longer.
Right. And people can make their own decisions about what's out there. But like I've said a couple times in recent interviews, in the internet age, ignorance is a choice. And if you don't want to believe the kinds of things that we're talking about that are uncomfortable, and you don't do your own research, then that's a choice. Mm-hmm. And that all of that information is available on the internet.
Yeah, go to your website. It'll take you months.
Even with censorship and everything else. I don't really go into the dark stuff. There was a couple times I've said a few things in some of my videos, and I always say it in a subdued way, if you will. Right. And I still leave it up to a person to decide, but it's like other people go into the darker aspects of what's been going on. Yeah. And I really don't like to go there. I don't like to talk about it. I much prefer bringing back this, advanced civilization, and what humanity was capable of.
So do you think do you know of a way we can bring that type of free energy back to here?
I'm sure it's possible. What I think is that we may not go back to exactly what we were, but we're going to go into something new, is what I think. But to do that, we have to come to terms with what's happened here. We can't change it. And so that's our challenge, is with all of the hard things that have happened here, how are we going to resolve it in love and compassion? Because I don't think we're talking necessarily about acceptance of what's taken place, but I think, in the frequency of the heart, which is our true intelligence. I mean, our brain is like a GPS and assistant. Our heart is where our power is. Mm-hmm. We just have to find a way to navigate through that with all the information that comes out and all of the hard things that are going on right now. Is, how do you navigate that in love and in compassion and equanimity and kindness, when everything that's coming out and coming at you doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, it definitely takes a dark turn when you're in your awakening. You eventually you get to the dark place because you can't, once you're awake, you can't stop finding new information because you're like, oh, what else did they keep from me? I talked to somebody who said she got into all this stuff because of diets. And it was like, oh, if they're keeping, if they're lying to me about this, what else are they lying to me about? And so many people, everyone I talked to, they got into it about someone got into about medicine, someone about history, someone about science, someone about
Politics.
space, yeah, someone about politics. There, it covers every aspect. I got into it from spirituality. I started having experiences, and then that got me into conspiracies. And what really started me was the ancient civilizations and giants. That was my two main, I was drawn to those things, I think, for a reason. And now that I've gone through, the loop of everything, now I'm back to where I started, what my passion always was. I was always interested in Egypt and the pyramids and all these different types of things, the anomalies of the world, the nine wonders of the world, whatever they call it. I was always drawn to those things as a kid. And now that I'm here, I'm like, okay, there is actually something tangible there. I like to think that Atlantis was a beautiful thing, and Lemuria was a beautiful thing. Uh, but when I get to, okay, maybe it was much closer. It wasn't some far off, fairy tale that maybe it was only a few hundred years ago. That really, really interests me. And when you have the map that you pulled up at first, it has the Gulf of Mexico. See, I get these psychic things from time to time, and one of the first things I got was Quetzalcoatl was in Atlantis, was Gulf of Mexico, and it was land, and that's where he was, and some technology came and destroyed it and sank it. And it's very interesting that it lines up on your chart the way that it does.
And you can find underwater ruins off the coast of Cuba. You can find them in the Gulf of Mexico. And there's a national underwater park in the Gulf of Mexico, and I can't think of what it's called.
You got Bimini Roads right over that way.
That's where that underwater Jesus was, I think, off the coast of Florida. There was an underwater Jesus.
Oh yeah,
that you could dive down to.
Wow.
Yes. So, there's definitely underwater infrastructure in a lot of different places. And again, I think the big question is, okay, did that happen a long time ago, or was that a lot more recent than what we've been told? And I definitely think the mud flood was within the last couple hundred years.
I agree with that.
I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, because you can see the whole 1800s they spent digging out the buildings, because you can see that there's windows that are right with the mud right at it, and nobody makes buildings that have windows underground or right directly at the ground.
I just want to show you this. So it's really hard to know exactly what they did with the historical narrative, but this picture of Pittsburgh in 1910 is when it's said to have been taken. If I can find it. Let's see. How about just Pittsburgh mud flood?
And when you hear the word mud flood, you're like, that's not a real thing, until then you look at it and look it up and see that soil liquefaction is a very real thing.
Yeah. It happens today with earthquakes. Right. So this is supposed to be Pittsburgh around the early 1900s.
Wow.
Whatever the time frame is on that, and I'm looking to see if I can find a definite date, but anyway, whatever the date is, I'm pretty sure that's Pittsburgh. What's going on there?
Yeah.
Whatever the facts behind it. I mean, you've got your Greco-Roman columns here.
Yep.
You've got all of this mud. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And there's, again, thankfully with the internet, there's so many pictures, so many different places where you can start getting a feel for that. That prior to the internet, it just wasn't available. I mean, you hear about disappearing giant skeletons that were found in the 1800s that were, at local museums or stores or whatever.
Up till the 1930s.
They were there, and then all of a sudden they're gone.
Yeah.
And you hear about them being whisked away by the Smithsonian and, taken to goodness knows where.
Right. And we wonder where all the mud comes from. We have the Great Plains, were they plains or were there things there and that it melted and flowed south?
I had a person reach out to me that lives in southwestern Minnesota in the Plains area where it's close to South Dakota and one of the other states, maybe Iowa, I'm not sure which one, but that's exactly what he was talking about. I mean, it's like prairie, tall grass, but you can't lay cable because of the bedrock,
right?
Things like that. So yeah, I would say for sure.
Well, Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson talk about that the possibility that the glaciers from Canada slid southwards as they were melting and they just cleared the way, which is very possible. Or it could be that there was something that made it flat. That something happened that flattened it completely.
Randall Carlson's a 33rd degree Freemason.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just going to say that. That's all I'm going to say.
And he openly admits it too.
Yeah, he does.
I thought he said 32nd, but maybe it is 33rd. But
33rd.
He openly admits it. So there is that, and you have to be careful with where you get your information from. But it's an interesting theory because it does work, and that's the thing with everything that they tell us, that it does work somewhat, but it doesn't work when you amass all of it.
Right, and that's how it worked for as long as it has.
Yeah, compartmentalization.
I mean, what you call a glacial erratic in North America is called a dolmen in Europe. But any other place in the world, it's a dolmen, which is a megalithic structure. If you see the same thing in North America, glaciers did it. And you'll see a gigantic stone on top of, like 3 little stones.
Right.
And but over in England, they're all over the place. And that's a dolmen.
Dolmen, I gotta look them up as well.
DOLMEN and glacial erratic.
Okay.
So you're looking for balanced rocks when you're looking that up.
So when you come across this stuff, have you come across the thing about the plateaus being giant trees that were cut down?
What I'm more a believer that the ancient humans were master builders, and they were very good with, knowing how to build things, and they were very big.
Okay.
And I'm open to a couple of things. I'm open to, sure, could have been a tree like Devil's Tower in Wyoming. It does look like a giant tree trunk.
Right.
Same thing with mud fossils, sleeping giant mountains and things like that. Yeah, no, I'm good with that. Where I differ is I don't think it explains everything.
Right.
And mesas are all over the earth, and I tend to think that there was an intentional design with those. So that's kind of where I diverge a little bit from some of those others. I don't think we're looking at primitive people. They look like primitive people today because that's what we've been told.
Yeah.
I
don't think there is such a thing as primitive people. I think that humans have always been as intelligent as we are. I don't think that changed.
So I think the controllers came in, stole the legacy, and turned the real builders into hunter-gatherer kinds of people.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't think the Europeans that came later were the builders of these things. I think the people that lived here originally were.
You know what else is really interesting? This is the last piece of information I'll give to you, is that all the continents all begin with an A. You know, you got North America, South America, but you take out the direction, it's America. Every one of them, you got the Americas, Australia, Africa, Antarctica, Asia. They all begin with A. Africa, did I say Africa? Well, if I didn't, I said it there. So,
That's how you say it every time.
except for Europe. Europe begins with E, and that's where you have all the empires come out of the British Empire, the French Empire, the Spanish Empire, the Roman Empire, all of these, and they're all white people that are all related, that all went over the entire earth and started conquering everything all around the same time and then fighting each other. It's like their family, you know, how brothers and sisters would infight, and that's what it seems like was going on. But they're playing with us like we're some kind of toy that, oh, you know, I'm going to rule Florida today. No, I'm going to come in and I'm going to rule Florida, and you know, all this nonsense.
Look up The Great Game.
The Great Game?
Great Game.
Okay.
That happened over in Asia between Great Britain and Russia. And that's what they call it, the Great Game. And it has to do with Afghanistan, Central Asia.
Okay.
That's how they looked at it.
Yeah.
So I would totally agree. And, you know, I think beyond that, I think there's just been a lot of human and social engineering going on to, you know, bring us to the world we live in today. And, you know, what we see as representing each continent. I think we're much smaller than we were. I definitely think we've been dumbed down and, you know, DNA and abilities turned off genetically. I think everybody's psychic.
Very much so.
You know, my psychic abilities, my intuition. But if, you know, I have a friend who's very psychic, and he's like, everybody's psychic.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, we've had our pineal glands fluoridated and, you know, goodness knows what else done to keep us from realizing those abilities, because if we had them activated, it would be a different world.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of heavy metals in our air, our water, our food. That's a big part of it. And the way that our health system works, you know, we all probably have parasites in us and bacteria in us that we can clear out just by taking over-the-counter type of things, wormwood, having extra garlic in your diet, you know, different little things that'll chase out these parasites. But if you don't chase them out, then they grow and grow and they control you more and more. And it's not, when I say they, I mean like the parasites are making decisions for you inside your body, that they're wanting you to eat that snack that isn't good for you. They want you to sit on the couch and watch TV when you should be up exercising. You know, that's keeping you that way because they need the host to survive.
It's like they've got the psychology of addictions down pat.
Yeah, it's like they invented
for all
it.
of us.
Yeah.
So, you know, and there is a lot, you know, so much more information. You know, my website, like you said, is piercingtheveilofillusion.com. Michelle Gibson's my YouTube channel, and if you type in Moors, Moors, it'll bring it up right away, because there's other Michelle Gibsons. Okay. And I signed up for a channel about 5 years before I started becoming a YouTube creator, so I didn't do anything creative with it. But it's just, you know, tell people, just start looking around your own community and you won't be disappointed. You just have to look at everything with different eyes.
Yeah, familiarize yourself with Google Earth.
Yeah.
Find a lot of good stuff.
I'm very much a fan of the short and sweet videos.
Yeah.
Along with your website, it's again endless information, and you can tell that you really have a passion for, you know, what you're doing and what you're looking for, and you do want to get it out there factually.
Yeah. And I hope to have my next video out tomorrow. It's already on my website, my latest one. And then I have everything done except putting the video together, which I want to get out in the morning.
Well, we look forward to it. I do ask all my guests at the end of the episode, what is your go-to grounding technique, and what is your favorite relaxation activity? With all the research that you do and all this dark occult stuff that you come across, how do you ground yourself into being back into a loving, grounded human?
I'll answer the second question because it's a little easier answer. I have a 17-year-old companion cat named Charlie. And my very favorite thing to do is take cat naps with him and
kind of that sounds wonderful.
Curl up with him. Cats are very healing animals. They're purring and just loving. Now
I have a female cat named Charlotte. That's funny. Yours is named Charlie, but she's hasn't been home in a few days now, which I miss her, and she's never gone this long, since we moved down here, and I want her to come home. So, I love my cats.
Yep. Well, mine's an indoor cat. He would like to be an outdoor cat, but he's always been an indoor cat because mom's a little protective that way. And when I got him, he was 5, and he was an indoor cat then. So he's really never been an outdoor cat. So that's my favorite relaxation. As far as grounding goes, I think I'm just a really grounded person. I have a natural organizational ability, which, it goes into my writing. It goes into how I live my life. It's like I like intuitively know what to do to get things done. And so part of that response is that I like to do things. I like to get things done, and I like to get things done well. But I'm also very task oriented. And so I've gotten feedback from other people as, hey, you're a really grounded person, or I like your route, Michelle, because I'm just, I'm the kind of person that I'm there for you to help. And so I don't really do a technique. But I would not call myself a, out there kind of person, chakra wise. I've got my intuitive channels open, but I'm just really grounded in terms of how I live my life.
And the way that you started off saying how you were in the army and then you were doing social work, I think that you're a very helping person, a very loving, kind person who wants to do a greater good for society. And that's what I see you're continuing to do, which some people will call you a conspiracy theorist for. But I see that it is for the greater good of humanity and what you're doing. And I really want to thank you for all your hard work. It is amazing, and we need more people to do more of this type of research so that we can get closer to finding the answers to these impossible questions.
Absolutely.
And that's a really great thing about this short and sweet series, because I'm getting some amazing stuff.
Oh, I bet.
People
Everybody's
are sending me
stuff.
It's like, oh wow, this is really, really cool. So yeah, people are sitting up and taking notice, and
I bet
it's been very, very productive relationship, I guess you could say. It's like, hey, just leave me a comment about a place you want me to look. And I don't want people to stop. I mean, I've got a long list, but it's all important. So, I may not be able to get to it right away, but it's on my list, and I will.
Yeah. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for us. I want to thank you again for coming on. This was an amazing conversation, and I'm so glad that we got to have it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And, I'm open for these things. So if you need me to come on again someday, I'd be happy to.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, that's fantastic.
To scratch the surface.
That's right. All right. We're going to say goodbye to our audience. Goodbye, everybody. We will talk to you later.